Simplifying Network Automation. We have a special guest today, Matt Schmitz. We're going to talk with Matt about Cisco Catalyst Center, what used to be known as Cisco DNA Center. So before we jump into the discussion, Matt, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Matt Schmitz. I am a technical solution specialist on a team within Cisco Virtual Engineering that focuses on DevNet, programmability, automation, all that fun stuff. The team I work on is a really great job because we focus on doing a lot of like rapid prototyping kind of thing. So a lot of times we get involved with customers, Cisco customers who are very interested in maybe adopting a Cisco product, but find some sort of issue or requirement, or hey, we need to complete some specific thing that is specific to our organization, and the product doesn't do that by default. And so that's where our team kind of comes in and helps to write some custom code, custom automation, and help fill that gap. About me myself, I have been working in IT and networking for God, I think like 15 or something years now. Spent
Mm,
about 10 years on the customer side doing network admin for quite some time, and then came over to Cisco about 5.5 years ago. So, but having a blast. So,
cool. So GV is the team, right? For
yeah.
folks that don't know, and it's basically like Matt was saying, for customers that are looking, they've heard about automation, they've heard about APIs, and maybe they need a bit of help, right? Proof of
Yep.
concept, rapid prototyping. That's where Matt and his team come in, and they build code, and that's one of the applications actually that we're going to talk about today. Matt and team have, well, mostly Matt, I think it was, they've built an application on top of Cisco Catalyst Center. So we talked about Catalyst Center before. We've seen with Gabby integrations with ServiceNow, right, and Splunk, and that's all built on top of the REST API that Catalyst Center provides. Same thing with the application that Matt built, right, is built on top of that API. So all the a lot of functionality with Catalyst Center is exposed over that API, so you can programmatically interact with the platform and build cool projects. Sky's the limit, basically, right? Whatever crosses your mind, whatever workflow you have in mind, you can go and with a bit of code, you can spin up an application. So, Matt, why don't you tell us about the VLAN provisioning tool, how that came to be,
Yeah, absolutely.
uh, how much time it took you, like tell us a bit of background on it.
Yeah. So, yeah, these things are always fun, right? Because sometimes, we get customers that come to us and just ask, "Hey, can we automate some Meraki stuff?" And it's a quick command line script, right? But sometimes we get to do some fun stuff like this, where I built a huge web dashboard to try to simplify what that customer's process was. A lot of it's just custom. It depends on what the customer's problem is and the best path to try to address those concerns, right? So in this case, we were working with a pretty big company that has locations all over the place. They're looking at adopting DNA Center, and obviously one of the big things that they liked about DNA Center was being able to deploy out templates and provisioning and have everything across their network very standardized. The problem with that is they had a bunch of remote locations, all of which have their local IT, their local network techs, who operate, to some degree independently of corporate IT. So then, with something like DNA Center, part of the challenge or issue that we ran into is, well, now we have corporate IT wanting to standardize and templatize and take away a little bit of control from those remote techs. But the remote techs still want to have their fingers in the pot. They want to be able to configure some of the parts of the device that they need to. And to some degree, they know what the site needs as far as like port config, VLAN config, how that should be set up, and that type of thing. So that was originally brought to like the account team and some of our internal like DNA Center specialists, and they're trying to sort this out with just base templates. And
Hmm.
the templating engine within DNA Center or Catalyst Center is strong. There's a lot of things you can do in that, but it does come. We ran into a little bit of challenges with trying to then give every single remote tech the ability to provision maybe only the switches in their site, or even only the ability to get to the template engine, and control what they could push to the switch, what configurations they could change, how they could deploy that stuff, how to manage that stuff. Um, without giving them just full-blown access to DNA Center and being able to go in and rec whatever they want, right? So corporate IT wasn't necessarily opposed to them having some access to DNA Center in like a read-only capacity for troubleshooting and that type of thing. But in terms of provisioning and templates and stuff like that, that's kind of where we ran into some of the challenges.
Okay,
So
so
that's where, yeah, go on.
it's basically, sorry for interrupting, it's just like role-based access control on DNA Center that was not granular enough, basically, right? You couldn't limit the rights of people connecting to DNA Center to only specific parts of the application.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially with, again, the DNA Center like templating engine, you could configure and do Jinja templates, velocity templates, do all of this magic to configure so much cool stuff within that. But it's more so built for the flexibility in mind and not so much built for the like, well, let's limit, you're only allowed to use these templates, these commands, and that type of stuff. Yeah, so that's where our team got involved. There was some discussion with the customer about like, well, maybe we could do this via the APIs, where maybe the remote technician has a text file template that they could just push out to DNA Center, and we'd have a quick script that would just deploy that out to DNA Center and handle that. So then they wouldn't have to know about DNA Center in the background. But there was some still concern over, well, how do we control what they're putting in that text file for the template that gets pushed out? And what if we get someone out at one of the remote sites who's smart enough and realizes that they have write access to all of the DNA Center APIs? And then they can start doing everything. They can look up the documentation. They can start making calls and do all sorts of stuff that they shouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
So that's one of the cool things about a lot of the APIs and automation and stuff like that, like you were talking about, is stuff's exposed. The sky's the limit. It's whatever you have the imagination for, right? So we built this. We proposed the solution of what about a proxy of sorts, right? So it's a front-end web application that is exposed to those remote site technicians. We have a quick little step-by-step workflow that allows them to go through and select the device that they want to configure, select what ports and VLANs and set up all that stuff, and then press a button and all of the magic is handled in the back end, right? They might have an account that has read-only access to DNA Center so that they can log in and do some troubleshooting, but they have no write access. All of that is proxied via some admin credentials that are embedded in the container, and the container is then hosted on the corporate side, so they don't have access to it. And then, hopefully then everything gets pushed and provisioned and deployed out to that switch, and that kind of solves that problem, right? Because it takes away their direct write access to DNA Center.
Right. Right. So I would imagine they have a VPN network, right? So those DNA centers, the controller is not really exposed, but that's just connectivity back to DNA center. It doesn't really matter. The important thing here is, right, yes, building that proxy kind of like front end to handle just the subset of the functionality of DNA center and giving that functionality to these technicians at different sites. Cool. So, do you want to show us how it looks, the application?
Yeah, I guess I could do that. That's the fun part, right?
Want to show us the demo? Yeah, let's.
So
let's see.
Yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. If I can grab this.
And folks watching, if you have any questions, let us know. Drop a message in the chat. More than happy to address your questions about this. All right, there we go.
All right. So you should be able to see this. I'll first start off with just showing off a quick thing about my team. So all of our code that we get that we work on for the customers, as long as the customer's okay with us pushing it out external, all of that gets published out to this GitHub. So this is github.com/gves-sw. So if there's any code that you might be interested in for any sort of Cisco products, there's a good chance that we've touched it in some way or another. So it's always a fun thing to browse through here and see some of what our team has done. So if you go in here and just search for VLAN, this DNAC VLAN provisioning here is the project that we'll be going through today. So I just wanted to show people how you can get to it if you're interested in taking a look at the code and or pulling it down yourself. There's of course the full README for how to set this up, get it all running, and we do publish the Docker containers over here as well too. So easy enough to get up and running. So let me go ahead and jump over to my demo environment. So this is a lab in dcloud. I have a DNA center here. In our inventory right now, let's go here. We have a couple of 9300 switches, two of which are offline, but one of them is online right now. So this is this C9300-1. And then the other thing that's important to show in the DNA center side before we jump into the automation demo is just the user access. So if we jump over to users and roles, I have a demo user created. So we'll edit him and see that it's demo user. The username is ro_user, and he's added to a demo underscore read only group.
Mhm.
And if we head over to RBAC, just to, one of those pull back the curtains, make sure I'm not pulling any tricks, right? Um, this account has read only access to everything. And for some of these that show that, just to prove it off, right? Read only access to the API, and some of these are set to deny. So this user, by all intents and purposes, can log into DNA Center, take a look at some stuff, but has no ability to provision anything. One additional thing, just as kind of a setup thing, is we will have to go over to the DNA Center tools and over to the template editor. And I have a project pre-created. Now, obviously, through some of the automation, I could have auto-created the project as well as the templates, but I decided just to make it easier on myself to ask, whoever's running the script to create a project, and then the script will go ahead and automatically manage the templates within that project. All right, last thing before we jump over to the actual demo itself, we'll just go ahead and log into that switch again, just to show that I'm not pulling any tricks here. We show VLAN, and we have the default standards that show up on a Catalyst switch. So we have VLAN 1, which every port is in, and then the other nonsense ones that no one uses these days anymore anyways. And show interface status. And just a quick show, all of these are most not in use, all of them are on VLAN 1.
Mhm.
Now that we've gotten all the setup done, let's go ahead and jump over to the app. So this is the app. It's a quick little web dashboard. I'll show how some of this is built and set up a little bit later. A lot of this is built using the Cisco UI kit, which I think there's a repo out on GitHub that you can pull down to use some of these components. So we have some stuff internal for our team, pre-built pages and pre-built forms and widgets and stuff like that we've developed over the years that make building this stuff out pretty easy and pretty quick for us. So go ahead and log in. Oops, to a read-only user. And I have a drop-down, so in case the customer had multiple DNA Center and Catalyst Center servers, you can pick whichever one. But we're just going to pick the first one and go ahead and hit login. Now, as I said before, this is using the read-only user's credentials only for login.
Mhm.
So the utility is using that just to make sure, hey, this person does have access to DNA Center. We could swap out in the code any other authentication server. So if we wanted to do like an LDAP call or something else like that, we could. But for the sake of a quick, prototype type of demo, it just uses DNA Center since we're already using that anyways. Then in the background, it kind of swaps out and starts using the admin credentials for all of the actual API calls after that initial login attempt. So on the first page, what we're going to be able to do is select whatever device we want to do or device we would like to manage and provision. So we can filter and put in any text as long as it matches one of the host names. So go ahead and put in 9300. Should take just a second. And similar to our DNA Center inventory page that we had showed earlier, we do have 3 9300 switches, and -1 is the only one that's online and reachable right now. But we can see all of them here and check the software version, what location they're in, and all that fun stuff. So of course, we're just going to go ahead and provision the first one. So we'll click that and go ahead and hit select device.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So this page, took me a couple days because it was a little bit of a nightmare because it was one of those things where I wanted to build out a lot of fancy stuff and make it more usable and more user friendly. And the best way that I could come up to do that with was some nifty JavaScript in the background, and I am not a JavaScript guy, so like it took me a while to figure this stuff out. But in the end, I made it work. Just don't look at what I wrote. It's not pretty.
Or look at it,
So
and if you want to, improve it, then go ahead, take what Matt has done so
yeah,
far, and give it another coat of paint and do a pull request, and you know.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not one of those people who's gonna sit there and be like, "Oh, I'm so proud of this. Don't touch it." I know that this was definitely not my strong suit. So there's probably much better ways of doing this piece of if I had just a little bit more experience with JavaScript, but got it to work. So this this page for all intents and purposes should be a little bit self-explanatory, right? So we can add a couple of different VLANs if we want to,
Mhm.
enter in our VLAN IDs, and enter in test VLAN, and we'll go ahead and create another one, 121, and I had to do all this fanciness just to even get the table rows to add. So we'll go ahead and remove that last one. We don't need it. And then here's the real cool part is just being able to take. So this automatically goes out to DNA Center and grabs all of the port names off of the device that we picked.
Mhm.
And then it adds it to a little drag and drop table. So if we want to go ahead and configure, like, let's say port 20 on the first one, and we'll do 31 as well. And then we'll grab 34 and 37. So those will all get removed from this bottom table and
Mhm.
then added up into this table up here. And if we needed to, remove port 37, we can drag that back down here. And it doesn't get put back in order because I couldn't figure that out, but it does get added back down to the end over here. Definitely a little bit of that showing the limitations of what I was able to do, but
But it's
it's all
functional, and it's just ordering the available
good.
interface. It's all
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. It still works. You can find the port. So once we're good with this form, so we're going to configure two VLANs, 120 and 121, and we're going to add 2 ports to one VLAN and 1 port to the other one. On the right side, we have a double check just to make sure we are configuring the right device. So this is Catalyst 9300-1. Here's our IP, here's our model, all that fun stuff. Once we're good, we can hit deploy. Now, when I click this button, it's going to take a minute because it's making a lot of different calls to DNA Center in the background. So I made it actually disable that button, give us a little spinning wheel for a minute. What this is doing then is it is pulling down or like generating the configuration based on some templates that we have running in the background. It's going to upload that template up to DNA Center. It's going to then commit the template so DNA Center knows it's valid, all that stuff, and then request that DNA Center provision that target device with the template that we just uploaded and generated. And once that provisioning process starts, we get redirected to this status page. And so right now, by default, it's just going to be, hey, this just started. Give it a second and refresh. I've definitely waited long enough now and made up some time. So we'll hit refresh, and this will go check real quick. And so this will say now, okay, the template is deployed, and we'll also get a snippet of here's the exact config that was deployed out to the device, so we can double check that was correct. And then, presuming that this was a remote site technician that was interested in, maybe we're rolling out DNA Center and there was a bunch of different switches that they needed to do, they could just, click start over, go back through and go through another device if they wanted to.
Nice. Nice.
So
Can you provision? Basically, you can provision also like brand new switches, right? You have a new switch, you have just
yeah,
connectivity to it on your. Oh, can you provision in advance before the switch is even deployed in DNA Center? No, because you would have to select it from the drop-down list.
yeah.
Yeah.
This is dependent on the switch already being in DNA Center and DNA Center's inventory. But for this particular customer, it was definitely something where I don't think they were super interested in going back and doing brownfield deployment with DNA Center. It was only going to be for let's get DNA Center up and running, and then greenfield, all the new switches that come in are going to be DNA Center managed. So this is definitely going to be part of that provisioning process where they needed those technicians to, hey, the switch is delivered. We have our base DNA Center settings like SNMP, NTP, all of those fun things. Now here's this tool, go configure your ports for the users, right?
Gotcha. All right. So Marcus, thanks for joining us, Marcus. He's asking, how long did it take to build that prototype?
Yeah, it's a good question. So these things are always fun, right? Because we could be, because of the nature of our team, we could be working on any number of projects for any number of customers at any point in time, and some of them, like this one, take a little bit longer, and some of them, are pretty quick and can be knocked out in a couple of hours. This one, I think the actual total time I spent on it was maybe 3 or 4 days. And I'll not lie to you, the JavaScript was probably a full day of that. um, but the good part is some of the especially some of the template provisioning stuff and some of that DNA Center interaction. I've done a handful of scripts like that before for other customers. So that stuff was definitely a little bit easier. Definitely one of the biggest things that I find people come to us for, at least the cases that I've and customers that I've worked with for that, is trying to figure out how can we automate like template deployment, template generation, and that type of stuff. So I have a couple of pre-built scripts already that have some of that code that I was able to draw from that.
All right, so your application calls a template on DNA Center. You could have multiple templates, right, for configuring different things. So the VLAN provisioning and creation and port configuration is just one of the templates that you could have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this could be easily extended. So I'll show in a minute when we get to the code too that this is all just Jinja templates in the background, similar to DNA Center. So even when I handed this code off to the customer, they were easily able to edit, obviously in this case, I'm just saying, here's the VLAN, 120, 121, all that fun stuff. And then this is doing a no shut, making sure that it's mode access and access VLAN, whatever. So those templates could be edited to add additional commands per port or per VLAN, as well as to your point, if we wanted any other templates or any other config to be deployed, that could just be added as well. And if we wanted to hop back over to DNA Center as well, if I refresh this template page, now in the production, quote unquote, production version of the script, the finished version of the script, I do actually have a utility in there that'll go in and delete these because in theory, there's a lot of people using them. So I create one that's tagged with the username, and then it'll go in and clean it up when it's done. But this is again in DNA Center itself. Here's the template that was pushed out to the device.
Mm-hmm. And you can keep track this through logs, events generated by DNA Center, as you can organize and see what people are doing.
Oops. Yeah, so even after I delete the template, these still show up in the audit logs.
Audit logs, they should, yeah.
So this will take just a second to load up. Yeah. Yeah, so here's that template being deployed by the read-only user. And if we drill down into this, this will show the commands that were pushed out. One of these. There we go. Executing command. Yeah, so this is the config that was pushed to the switch.
All right. So all of this is running off of that Docker container, right? Sorry. You wanted to say something else here?
Yeah, no, to your point, yeah, it's all running off this Docker container. So even I have this up running and showing some of the logs. So even as it's running, it goes through, generating the templates, uploading, finding the project ID, uploading that template up to DNA Center, committing the version, pushing it out to the device, and all that fun stuff. So, and checking the deployment status. Yeah, the only other thing I was going to say real quick was just again as another one more validation is if we go back to that switch and check our VLANs, we do have VLAN 120, VLAN 121, and those are the ports that have been added to it. So exactly what we configured in that utility.
One concern that comes to mind is that you had to hard code the admin credentials somewhere in the background, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for the Docker container, those credentials are exposed via environment variable.
Yeah.
So obviously those are, not hard coded in the container, and they could be potentially protected with some sort of secret store or something like that if you wanted to. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a lot of the stuff that we write for customers is again, it's rapid prototyping, it's proof of concept code. So, we do our best to try to make things a little bit rock solid and think about the security side, but sometimes, especially depending on the timeline for the customer, sometimes it's write the code and get it out the door. If it needs a pretty quick turnaround. This one I did have a little bit of time with, so I did get to spend a little bit more time on trying to think about how would this work in a multi-user context and how would that that kind of stuff work. And then to your point too, there is I actually have a environment variable switch in the code as well, so that if you want to, you can actually run the entire app in a mode where rather than just using someone's user credentials for the login and then it switches to that hard-coded admin credentials in the backend, you could flip it to a single user mode is what I called it, right? So if I log in with an admin credential, someone with write access to the API here, it'll use those credentials all the way throughout the process.
Gotcha.
Without or some other stuff in the backend too. So if you had people that had write access to DNA Center, it doesn't matter. You can run it in that single user mode. But if you wanted the people using this app not to have access to DNA Center, and that's where we'd use the multi-user mode.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool. That having that switch, that's a step in the right direction. Cool.
Yeah.
And then you pass in your DNA Center credentials basically as environment variables, which is also it's acceptable in my mind.
Yeah. It's there's never it's always hard to figure out how to handle that thing, and sometimes it feels like there's never a good way to store that kind of information, but
You have to get it
the best you can
somehow.
do, right?
Yeah. You have to get it
Yeah.
somewhere. All right, Matt. So cool. You wanna have a look at the code? You wanna show folks
Yeah.
maybe not
Yeah.
the
Absolutely.
JavaScript, but was this
We'll skip that part conveniently.
was this Python in the background?
Yeah, it's a Python and Flask
Okay.
primarily. So again, just to show a little bit of the setup and some of the ancillary stuff before we get into the Python
Yeah.
code. Just to set this up, we have a couple of environment variables. So these could be set for the app mode, again, single user or multi-user, depending on which version you wanted to run in. And if you were running in that multi-user mode where people didn't have write access, then we'd also have to configure the DNA Center username and password for that administrative user that has access to be able to configure those APIs. The other thing is we do have a list of just the DNA Center servers or Catalyst Center servers, and some information about the templates and project config that is getting deployed. So we can list out any number of servers that could be deployed, or DNA Center servers that we could use. So if you have a bigger deployment with multiple DNA Center servers, put all of these in here. Those get selected from that drop-down page on that login. And then again, here's where I'm configuring
but we're not seeing we're still seeing just the VLAN provisioning.
You're not seeing that? Okay, hold on. Yeah, it's a problem with sharing just a single window.
No worries. Hey,
That's
John.
Let's bring this up. All right, how about now?
Yes, and can you zoom in a bit, please?
Yeah.
All right.
Is that too much?
No, that's a bit too much. That's a bit too much. Maybe one lower.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, so I'll just go back real quick. Here's that environment variable file. So just a couple of quick environment variables to store the application mode, DNA Center user and password, and then a YAML file that defines each server that we're using, and then the template and project name. So the template or the project name, again, is something that needs to be created within DNA Center already, so that I have a project that I know I'm able to create templates in and manage templates, and it's not going to hurt anything. And then the template name this is just what we're using as a placeholder. And then again, onto the end of this gets appended whoever's user ID was the one to log in with that account and start provisioning. The other thing that I had mentioned before was these are just Jinja templates. So for each port that gets configured, it's interface, whatever the interface name is, search port mode access, access VLAN, whatever the ID is, and a no shut. And for VLAN ID, it's just as easy as the ID number and the name. So these could be edited if the customer or whoever wanted to add additional config commands in here, especially if they had 802.1x or MACsec or something else like that they wanted to put on each port and make sure that every port was standard, they all had the same thing. That could all be done on here. And obviously the app could be extended pretty easily to include some additional templates that get appended, even if they didn't select that through the UI.
Nice. Your port securities, whatever else you need, it's easily editable. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and jump into the fun stuff.
All right.
So yeah. So to kick this off, obviously we have the quick section here that's just loading in the environment variables, deciding what the app mode is, and again, if it is that multi-auth version where I need an administrative user in the background, we're double checking that we do have that credentials, and if not, killing the app and giving an error. The other setup stuff that we have is again loading the DNA Center servers out of that YAML file, loading in the config templates out of our config templates directory, and then setting up Flask along with there's a library I'm using called Flask Sessions that'll give per user sessions based on whoever's logged in and stuff like that. so that I can just make sure that, whatever your page you're on, whatever information you're selecting and all that stuff is stored, and it's stored to your specific user as you logged in. And then after all that setup is done, if you've ever used Flask, all the way down at the bottom, we'll just go ahead and run the app. So, so to begin with, quick root page just checks to see if there's already the user is already authenticated, and if they are authenticated, we'll redirect them to the first step of the process, which is selecting which device they want to provision. If they're not authenticated, then we obviously have to force them to the login page. Login page, pretty straightforward. We're just gonna, we do have a quick check again to make sure that they're authenticated, and if they hit this page first and they already have an authentication session, then we can go ahead and just kick them over to the first page. If not, we do need to authenticate them. So on a post, so form submission from the login page that has user ID, password, and the server. We're going to pull all that stuff out. We're going to store it in the local session variables, grab the DNA Center server, and then try to authenticate. So again, depending on which authentication mode we're using, if we're using single mode authentication where it's just an admin user through the entire thing, we check to make sure that we can get a DNA Center session. If so, we continue. And if it's multi-auth mode, what we do is try to get that session and assume, if the user can authenticate to DNA Center, that they have access, they're allowed to use it. And then we swap their session credentials for the rest of the session with the administration credentials so that that is the user that's being used in the backend. Couple little things in here for error checking stuff, especially if you fail to log in. So we can pop a little error message that says, too bad, try again. And then after all of that, assuming we have an access token, so the access token's not blank, we can go ahead and set authenticated to true and redirect the person to the device selection page.
If not, invalid access token and you don't have a token.
So if something went wrong and somehow we don't have a token at that point, we'll pop another error and redirect them to the login page. Before we get into the process workflow, I also just have a quick logout page that is when you click that button, it just goes through all the session keys and your session data and clears it all out, and then redirects you to the login to the login page, which is pretty straightforward. All right, now into the actual
select device. Here we go.
So on each one of these pages, just as a safety, we always check to make sure that we have that authentication, that the auth key in your session is set to true. And if not, then we'll kick you back to the login page. Then we're going to create a session storage for the DNA Center devices. So all of the devices that we're storing from DNA Center based on what your search is. And then on that login page, if you remember, we had two forms. One was the search form. So you could put in whatever filter you wanted for the host name of the device and hit submit to search. And that would populate the device table. And then from an HTML standpoint, the device table itself is a separate web form that then you select the device and hit go, and that data is being returned. So depending on which data we're getting back from Flask or from the web front end determines what we're doing. So on a post, if we're getting the form for the device filter, then we need to go retrieve the DNA Center devices. And if we're getting a device selection, then we can continue on with the VLAN provisioning. So for the DNA Center, grabbing the DNA Center devices, this is just making that session again out to DNA Center based on the credentials that we're using, doing an API call, and this is all using the DNA Center SDK, grabbing device list, and we're filtering by specifically switches and hubs, and based on that host name filter that the user put in. Once that data comes back, if you've ever made this API call before, it's a huge mess of all sorts of information about the devices. Way more than I need and way more than I certainly need to try to keep in session storage. So I filter that out a little bit and grab just some of the credentials in it, or some of the information that I need. Actually, I have a sample of that, but let me stop my screen share real quick and see if I can go back to just sharing that entire screen instead.
That API call, I remember, it's pretty verbose. Lots of data in there.
There we go. Okay. So now you should see Notepad++. So this is the output of the dictionary that I'm building. So it's just a list based on each device IP address, and then I'm storing just the information that I'm going to need to run the rest of the app, so that I don't have to sort through the full dictionary, the full information from that's returned from DNA Center. I don't have to store all of that. I don't have to care about it all. I'm just keeping the stuff that I care about. So once we build that whole list, that does get sent back to up here. Go back one more. This gets sent back to that form, and upon getting our device list back, we save that into the session data. So if it needs to be reused, it's easy to get. We don't have to pull it from DNA Center again. And we render the select device HTML again, which is the page with the DNA Center devices. So we'll fill out the table with each device. I can go ahead and grab some of that. Select device. Right, this might be, grab this. All right, yeah, so this is that first section right here. This is that first form that I was talking about for form filtering. And that's just pulling in, here's the ID is that device filter. So that's how we're picking up on that in the Flask side of things to make sure that that is the form that we're pulling out. And then after I get the devices back, this is that second panel for selecting the device that prints out the table. So we have a quick table being built out. Here's our header for the device name, whether or not it's reachable, and all the other information. And then again, just a Jinja template that iterates through each device that's returned on this page when we generate it, and prints out all of that information. So, oops. Okay. So, all that being done, once someone finally picks a device and says,
the device,
"Go,"
yes.
Yeah, this is the one we want. They'll hit post again. So we'll receive a post request. We'll check the form, and this should be that target device ID form. So we'll set our target device to what they selected, and then redirect them to the VLAN provisioning page, where then we can do the fun stuff. So on this page, we go ahead and pull the devices that we have stored in session storage. And on the first load, what we'll do is we'll actually skip this post section up here. We'll jump down here to the interfaces. So on the first load, we have the device that we know that the user wants to provision, but we don't know anything about the device. So this will just go to DNA Center and grab the interfaces. So grab this real quick. Nothing too fancy here, just filtering out a couple of things. So we'll get interfaces info by ID, pass it that device ID that we want to retrieve just the interfaces for, and we'll get a list of everything off of that device. And then we'll iterate through that real quick and just pull out the gigabit Ethernet interfaces. We don't need any of the management interfaces. We don't need the app gigabit or any of the additional slots or anything else that could be in it. This is just the front panel, 1 through 24, 1 through 48 ports that we want to do, right? So this is assuming that corporate IT or whoever's managing this in central, right? They could modify this filter if they wanted to, if they wanted people to be able to configure those additional ports. But we just assume that those are, for example, if you have a slot in there for 10 gig or something like that for uplink, maybe that's not what we want the end user to be managing. So we're just not even going to include that as an option for them to do.
But you could modify the code here if you want to give them access to that too. So that's easily changeable. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, easy enough to edit if you wanted to come in here and do that. So once we grab all that, we do store all of that in another session variable for the interfaces, and it's just a simple map of the port name, so the human readable name of Gigabit Ethernet, 108 or whatever, to the DNA Center unique ID that maps to that exact interface object. So once we have now the device itself, as well as all of the interfaces, we can pass that back to that VLAN provisioning page. That is going to render in this, again, just another form. It's going to have the VLAN ID, the name, the assigned ports, give you the little cells for all of that fun stuff.
The drag and drop,
all of the interfaces,
and all that.
Yeah, the drag and drop and all that fun stuff. All of that gets loaded into this page, so then we can we can start pulling in, whatever, let the user create stuff. Here's the section at the bottom where we create that drag and drop. It's just dumping every single interface in the interfaces list into a draggable table at the bottom. Yeah, this was definitely one of those problems too, where it's fun because think about if a switch has 24 or 48 ports, what's the best way of allowing someone to configure every single port or all the different ports, but also you have to watch out for if I did just a drop down for every VLAN, I got to make sure if I select a certain port on one VLAN that it gets removed from the others because we don't want to, they're not going to have access to configure trunk ports. They're only going to be able to access ports. So we don't want, there are conflict, and then we have to check for the conflict. And so it ended up just being one of those, like, a drag and drop sounds easy, right? And I say sounds easy, like user side sounds easy, and then it's up to me to figure out how to do
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
But from the drag and drop side, then you did remove a lot of that, like, validation and checking, and instead and the other thing about, like, a drop down is, if you want to go double check, you have to click on the drop down and maybe scroll through the ports to figure out, oh, what did I select up here? But this interface kind of made it a little bit easier and more easy to just, like, look at it and see, what was going on.
Yeah,
So we'll hop back over to the app code.
it's just not
Yeah, go ahead.
ordering when you remove the interface and you put it back in the list. It's not ordering them again in by name, but we'll add that flag. It's okay.
Yeah. So again, once they filled out the form, we'll and hopefully receive a post. And this is another part where that JavaScript came in, because you think about a table like that, and with Flask, if you have a bunch of different cells in a form, just a plain HTML form like some of the others, like I can go ahead and grab, like, the select device one, for example. So if we think about this one where we have, okay, here you're doing this device filter, and here the input ID number or ID and the name is device filter. So that's a specific field with a specific name that I can look at and pull in the Python code to figure out what was entered in that. But when you think about, well, okay, if we go back to the VLAN provisioning page and I'm configuring, where's it at? Yeah, input here for VLAN ID number, right? Well, what's to tell me what the first VLAN ID is for the first table row versus the 8th table row? And how do I separate all that out and get it into a structure that makes sense and all that fun stuff? So that was another part where the JavaScript really came in handy, is trying to then write some custom stuff to read that table on submission and get it into a format that made sense. And I do just have a quick example of that. So this is just the format that it gets read from the table. Pretty easy. Just the row number, VLAN ID, VLAN name, and then a list of the ports. I probably could have built this a little bit better, but that's what I had at the time. So
yeah, so you get that form, right, with the rows, and then you massage it to pass it on to DNA Center, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so once we get once we hit that submit button, this is that payload then that gets sent back to the Flask code. So on post, we're going to get that little payload, and we're going to start the DNA Center stuff. So you can see real quick here, we go through generating the template payload, which is then going to be based on those Jinja templates, and we can walk through that real quick. Then we upload it to DNA Center, and then go ahead and kick it off for deployment and fast forward the user over to that status page. So for some of these, pretty quick, I won't jump through all of these because, I mean, I can, but we grab our port and our VLAN Jinja templates, and then it's simple as just going through every entry in that Python dictionary that gets returned, creating a new VLAN entry for the VLAN ID, the VLAN name, and then going through each port and doing the same thing, interface port, whatever, gig, whatever, and then adding in the rendering that template, Jinja template that I shown earlier with the port name and VLAN ID. That all gets appended to a list and then sent back up top. Back real quick. And we can upload that template. And so this again is passing the template payload that was generated by this generation function, as well as here's the target that we want to hit, the device IP or whatever. So So this will grab the project ID. So it'll just go to DNA Center and make a quick API call to find the project by the name that we specified. It'll also check to see if a template already exists for this exact pull. Likely it doesn't, because I guess again, in theory, I'm deleting it when I'm done with it, so it shouldn't exist. But just in case, if it does exist, we'll grab the existing template ID so that we know that we can just update the existing template rather than create a new one. And then we have to create some device types. So this will some device information and stuff like that that's got to be attached to the profile. So we'll have to have the device family, device series, so we know it's a 9300 and all that fun stuff, so we know what the template applies to. And then the template gets deployed with some of the parameters that are down here. So this includes the payload right here. It is a velocity template. Here are the device types that we're attaching it to, IOSXE. I do set the session author to whoever was the logged in user. So initially when you logged in, if you logged in with that read-only user, the template author would get set to that user ID, so we know who created and deployed the template. And then it also does, again, generate on the name as well, so that it's the template or the stand-in template environment variable that we had set, as well as the author name. So that's attached to every template as well. And so then this just goes ahead and goes through the if we did find a template ID above, then we can just go ahead and update it with the information that we already generated up top. More than likely we didn't though. So if not, if there's no template ID, so we don't have an existing template, then we go ahead and create a new template with those parameters. Now, one thing that's interesting is you'll see in each one of these there's a hard-coded sleep for a couple of seconds. I actually ran into an interesting problem with another customer a while back, and it was one of those fun things that the lab and what your development environment doesn't match reality, that kind of thing. Where I didn't have these in here, and I would do stuff where I'm generating a template, pushing it out to DNA Center, and then immediately going to try to deploy it. And because in my lab I don't have a DNA Center running, right? I'm VPNing in somewhere, accessing it in a remote data center. There's enough latency in there to give DNA Center enough time to build out that template, generate its unique identifiers for the template, process everything, get it all ready. And so I never had a problem, right? So then I gave code. It was a different set, not just this one, but a different set that I gave to someone. And they're like, "Hey, I ran it, and every time it's giving me this error saying the template doesn't exist." And I'm like, "What?" It turns out they're literally sitting at a desk, plug switch, DNA Center is right next to them, so there's no latency. So as soon as they provision the template and it gets into DNA Center, the script immediately hits that call to try to provision the template. And DNA Center is like, "Hey, that template doesn't even exist yet. I'm not done with it. I haven't even created it. I haven't finished that logic yet." So it's I could have written some code in here to continue to try to check a couple of times to see if the template exists. But again, hand wavy rapid prototyping, I just put it does the job. Adds a couple of seconds. That's it, right?
Yeah. So this was actually going to be my next question, right? All these gotchas, because when you start these projects, right, it's clear in your head, hey, this is what I need to do. But then you hit all these roadblocks, and it's okay, exactly like you were explaining here, Matt, right, with the sleep.
Yeah.
So what else? What are the gotchas or issues you've encountered? Because I'm sure you've run into other problems too as part of this.
Yeah, that's a good question. Man, I'm sure I have a million of them because nothing ever goes the way you want it to.
Right.
This is definitely one of them that comes to mind. I've definitely run into a couple of especially when I first started getting into DNA Center app provisioning and stuff like that. There's a lot of this kind of setup that took me forever to get right. I have some other pieces of code that I've run with DNA Center and template provisioning and stuff like that I've definitely hit some stuff in. I have another example with a customer where they wanted to be able to check every switch on their network for what the current configured SNMP values were, right? Because they're onboarding stuff into DNA Center. And if the SNMP values were incorrect, then they wanted DNA Center to push out a template to reprovision them. And you'd think, oh, well, first thing, I'll just use DNA Center command runner, right? Because that's used to get show commands, run them on the device, and get whatever information back. Well, it turns out DNA Center actually classifies SNMP strings, which I guess rightfully so, as confidential or privileged information. So it blocks that out of the results from command runner. So after doing a bit of digging around, there is another function within DNA Center called like a config archive export, where you can give DNA Center a key and it will generate an encrypted export of the entire config with those credentials still in there. And so like that was definitely one of them where it's like, okay, well, instead of being able to do it the simple way, all via APIs, I literally have to do it this way, download a zip file, unzip the file, go through all of the configuration, parse all of that type of stuff and get that information out. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So that's one of them. With credentials is always tricky, like we were saying, right?
Yeah.
Extracting, passing them around. Always have to be careful.
Yeah.
All right. So
The other thing was just getting some of the template like payloads and stuff like that. Like I played around with generating Jinja and Velocity templates, and especially the formats via API upload took me a little bit to get used to, but it's not too hard. A lot of that was my own trying to figure out how DNA Center structured some of that stuff and built it out. But yeah, it's not too bad.
yeah, it's a trial and error, right? At that point, you keep trying
Yeah.
until you get it right. You modify and adjust your templates until it works.
Yeah.
All right. So uploading template, right? You pass in the
Yep.
parameters, call.
Yep. And then once that template does get uploaded, the only thing we do have to do is like save and commit a version of it.
Mhm.
So we create a versioned commit of that template and add a quick comment that says it was provisioned via the API. And then again, just to be safe, we give DNA Center another moment just to make sure that it handles that and everything's ready before saying the template's good to go. So then this all gets passed back up to the main code with the template ID. And I'll just go ahead and jump straight down here to where we deploy that template. So similar to the template creation, DNA Center is going to expect some information in order to deploy that template out to the clients. So we have to give it the device. You could do IP or the UUID or a couple of different options. You just have to tell it what identifier you're giving it and what type of identifier it is. So in this case, I am giving it the device UUID, and I'm telling it that that is the type of information that I'm giving it. And then we can go ahead and deploy it out. So this is just going to deploy that template via the deploy template API with the template ID that I've already generated that's attached to DNA Center and the list of devices that I want to. In this case, again, it's only one device, but DNA Center expects a list, so that's what we pass it. Then we're going to go ahead and grab the session ID. Now, here's an interesting one for you since you're asking about some of the issues and stuff that I've run into. I have run into a couple of interesting cases where I might be a bug or something, or maybe I was just running a bad version of DNA Center code from a long time ago. But I'd actually get sometimes this deployment ID within the response would be kind of a jumble. So like you'd expect that the deployment ID should be a unique identifier that's like a certain format. But sometimes the error message for why the template didn't get deployed would get appended into that field. So when I would just pull back that deployment ID and just expect that it was an ID, it actually would sometimes break the code. So in this case, I'm explicitly making sure that I'm matching that it does match, right regex for what a UUID should be. And if it doesn't, then I just assume, hey, it failed, something went wrong, and so we pass an error back to the user.
Gotcha. So yeah, you would have to test also with different versions of DNA Center, right? And kind of adjust your
I'm sure
code
there are
as
other
you go.
versions where it
Yeah.
works.
All right.
Yeah. Cool. So let's go ahead and scroll way back up here. Where are we at? Select device.
So we built the template, we pushed it, it's getting applied, and then you get the message back, right? If it failed, if you get the template ID, and if there's anything else besides that ID, it means that it failed, basically. If it's just the ID, then it went well, and you return to the user, great, right? The template has been successfully applied.
Yeah. And then once we're all done with that, we can finally push the user over to that status page that I had. And this is pretty simple. Just has that little box in the middle that says whether or not something's going on. So by default, the status is going to be set to, hey, I just pushed the template, come back later, with the little refresh button that they can click. And so when they do click the refresh button, it'll send a post to Flask. And if there is a template ID already, then we'll get the template deployment status, which is just a quick API call out to DNA Center to pull the current status, whether it's completed, not completed, still in progress, that type of stuff. And if there are any errors from that, we'll actually just store those errors from DNA Center and return it to the user in an error field so that they can read it and do something about it. And then last but not least here, I did mention before in the final version of the code that is up on GitHub, I do have a check-in here so that when you do that refresh, if the deployment is a success and we're all done with it and there is still a template ID, I'll just delete the template. So I'll go out to DNA Center, clean up the template, remove the template ID from the session so that it's all gone and all that fun stuff. So then again, if you have like 100 remote sites, each with their own remote technician, DNA Center is not just getting overwhelmed with a bunch of templates. They all get cleaned up after they're done being used. So.
Yes, that was bringing me to the next question, scale, right? This customer, so did they try in a large environment? We're talking about, hundreds, thousands of switches with hundreds of technicians. Like, how does that scale?
Yeah, I mean, in their environment, to my knowledge, they had, I think it was a couple hundred or like maybe between 1 and 200 locations that all could potentially have different technicians, and a couple thousand switches all in all. Now, unfortunately, I was only involved for this aspect of it, so I think this is still when they're early and they're testing and they're trying to get this stuff figured out. So I don't know. I didn't get the fun job of getting to find out if they actually deployed this out and whether they're using it or whatever else. Again, as it's worth throwing out because a lot of the stuff that we write is prototyping. The expectation is that if the customer really likes this, and they do like it, they're either going to work internally if they have developers or maybe with a Cisco partner or something to get this like fully built out and solid and like production ready and all that fun stuff. So yeah, I'll have to go back to them and ask if they ended up using it or not. So
cool. Cool. Okay, so you have also, what is that? I see a reset.
Yeah.
And it's just a get.
Yeah, oh yeah, this is for the start over. So if you hit that start over button on the status page, so that they could go back and reconfigure a new device from scratch, we hit this reset real quick, and this will just wipe out all of the state that I was keeping for the current device, for the template payload, for whatever they had selected and all that stuff, and then redirect that user back over to the device selection start screen so that they could start over. So it doesn't kill their session in the app, just all of the other information that's relevant to the deployment.
Cool. Okay, so improvements, man, right? What would you improve on this if you had time? Right, like you have a month just to work on this. Like, okay, what would be the first couple of things that you want to improve?
Yeah, that's always the killer thing because like what we do is kind of fun, right? Because we're always working with different customers, different technologies, and we get our hands on all sorts of stuff. But from that standpoint, then I never get to see things to like, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people that like, I love to like build this out. And as I'm going, I'm like, oh, it'd be really cool if we could do this. And oh, it'd be really cool if we could do that. And, do that type of thing. But at some point you have to sit there and be like, no, I don't have time. You need to stop. Right.
If you would have the time, that's my question is if you would have the time.
Yeah. So, yeah, I have a list of ideas of stuff I'd love to do with this. I'd love to make it a bit more reactive and a bit more like, I've thought about this if I was better with the JavaScript stuff, right? Because with Flask and the front end, every time you do anything, right, you're sending a call to Flask, and then Flask has to re-render and return a new page. So every time it's a page refresh, every time you do something. So I wish there's if I was a little bit better, like had more time to spend with JavaScript and was interested in getting into that a little bit more. I wish there was some way, or would like to spend some time on trying to make that a little bit more reactive, so that it's not just all a page refresh every time. It would be cool if maybe we could configure or provision multiple switches at a time, or again, try to modularize the app a little bit more, that it would be sort of easier to add on other config items and stuff like that. I think also I thought about this and ended up not doing it because I didn't have time, but DNA Center does have some API calls that you can send a template or like use your template and then do like a test provision, and it'll generate what the config is. Like if there are variables within your Velocity or Jinja template, it'll render all of those, pretend like it was going to provision the device and give you the result. So I thought about, if on the page where you select your device or not select the device, but like add all your VLANs, add all of your interfaces. At that point, you click deploy to device, and you're hoping that what you entered is right, and you're hoping that the app is pushing the right things. And that's where I did add that quick status at the end that shows what was provisioned to the device. But I thought about trying to see if we could build out something where it would like pop that ahead of time and be like, hey, here's the configuration. Here's what we think we're going to push to the device. Is that okay? Is it not okay? And if it's not okay, allow them to like edit and change and update that dashboard. But that's just a couple of things. I have quite a list of things I wish I could add to it, but if I had the time.
All right. All right. Oh, okay. So we're top of the hour. Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you also showed the repo, right, where people can find this code was github.com/gv-sw. Was that it?
Yeah, if you go to github.com/gvesw-sw, you'll find our team GitHub page. And then within that, if you search for the DNA Center VLAN provisioning, you can find this repo here. And again, all this stuff is in here to get it up and running, including some Docker files and Docker Compose and all that fun stuff to help make it a little bit easier. It is also on the DevNet Code Exchange as well. So
perfect. Thanks everyone for joining. Matt, thank you so much for showing this project and sharing with the community. We really appreciate it. Folks, remember, next week we're back at it. Finally, we're bringing John Kearns and we're going to cover Meraki CLI. So really excited, looking forward to that one. Matt, thanks again. Take care, everyone. And see you next week.
See you, everyone.